Welcome to Newsmax TV. I'm Kathleen Walter. Our next guest is best known as the lead prosecutor in the O.J. Simpson murder case. With us now is former Los Angeles District Attorney Marcia Clark. She's also the author of the brand new book, Killer Ambition. And Marcia, thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Well, 14 people have been arrested in L.A., where an anti-George Zimmerman rally turned violent. In Baltimore and in Mississippi, 2 people were attacked, allegedly in retribution for the verdict. Protesters have stormed a Walmart, and George Zimmerman's parents are in hiding from an enormous amount of death threats. What do you make of the violence and the fallout from the Zimmerman verdict?
It's not good on either side. You know, none of this is good. It's one thing to have civil debate. It's one thing to have rational disagreement and discussion about what it all means. But violence on either side, protests that turn violent. It's one thing to have a civil protest, maybe even marching where there's no violence, and that's fine. But this is so unproductive. It helps no one.
The O.J. Simpson case back in 1995 brought race and crime to the forefront of American dialogue, just as the George Zimmerman case has done in recent weeks. What, if any, similarities or differences do you see between these 2 cases?
Well, of course, the cases are very different, factually speaking. And yet there is, I think if you take it down to the core issue in terms of why the juries did what they did, at the most general level, and I am generalizing in order to draw the analogy, I think there is something to be said about the fact that people have different views of the world based on their life experience. The jury in the Zimmerman case had their life view, and the jury in the Simpson case had theirs. And it's part of our jury system that we want people to bring their life experience into the mix. We want them to bring their common sense based on their life experience into the evaluation of evidence. But the problem is that means all of their experiences come in, not just the ones you think are most helpful to an objective view of the facts. And so if jurors who have a distrust of police bring that life experience into the mix in a jury room, then that is going to have an impact on their deliberations. And likewise, if jurors come into the jury room with preconceived ideas about people of color or young people or neighborhood watch people or that kind of thing, that's going to have an impact as well. And so discussion needs to occur about all of this, but civil and rational debate and discussion, not name-calling, violence, bottle-throwing. That's not helpful. That's not going to help anyone.
In your view, did the Zimmerman jury get the verdict right?
I have to say, I came into this case thinking it was a tough case for the prosecution, and I was open about that from day one. Never thought this was a slam dunk. Because it's difficult in all self-defense cases when there are only 2 witnesses and one is dead to say exactly what happened. You rely on the word too much. You have to rely on the word of the person who has a motive to fabricate. And that's true in all cases. I'm not saying anything about George Zimmerman. I'm talking about defendants in general. And I say that as a prosecutor. That is what you know to be true. So it's very difficult for a jury to figure out exactly what happened here. That said, I did think there was enough evidence for a conviction of manslaughter. And I do think that part of the reason the jury came to the conclusion it did is that it dismissed the, I think, pivotal testimony of Rachel Jantel, who was on the phone with Trayvon Martin in his last minutes.
What is your assessment of how the prosecution handled the case?
I thought they did a good job. I did. They had a tough uphill battle. There is no doubt about it. They had to rely on putting together a very circumstantial case, much of it based on inconsistent statements by George Zimmerman. And when it comes to that sort of testimony, that sort of evidence, it's up to the jury to decide how important they think the inconsistency is. If they can look at the inconsistency that George Zimmerman thought Trayvon Martin jumped out of the bushes and then the next day was unable to find any bushes that he could have jumped out of. One person looks at that and says, wow, evidence that he lied. Another person looks at that and says, so he made a mistake. That's always a difficult case. So, I think they did the best they could with the case that they had.
The families of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman sued O.J. civilly and won, and there's speculation that Trayvon Martin's family could sue George Zimmerman as well. Does the family have much recourse here?
The family has the same recourse. I mean, O.J. Simpson never paid a dime on his civil judgment, and it's doubtful. That's the problem with civil judgments. They are enforceable to a point, but, it doesn't really take that much to avoid them. So, while the Martin family may well sue and may well prevail in civil court, as did the plaintiffs in the lawsuit against Simpson. But whether that actually is of any benefit, I'm just not sure about that. I don't know. Certainly I don't think anybody ever really collects money on these judgments, and I don't think that is ultimately really the point either. They want to have their side vindicated, and I don't know whether it will be. It is easier in civil court, though. They have a lower standard of proof, which is a preponderance of the evidence instead of beyond a reasonable doubt. So it is possible they will prevail in civil court.
Now, Attorney General Eric Holder says the Justice Department will conduct a civil rights investigation of George Zimmerman. Is this nothing but a political move, or do you see the feds really bringing civil rights charges against Zimmerman?
What a good question. I can't say exactly. I'm not inside at the Department of Justice, and they have their own criteria for what they file and how they proceed with cases, and so I can't say whether they will ultimately proceed with the case or not. I don't know. I can say the U.S. Attorney has the power to take this case because there is no double jeopardy between state and federal prosecution. So just because you're acquitted in state court doesn't mean a federal court can't take the case. So the U.S. Attorney could certainly do it. Whether they will or not is a different matter.
You're now an author, having penned 3 books of the Rachel Knight series. Killer Ambition is your newest. How do we see your experiences as a prosecutor making their way into Killer Ambition?
Well, the prosecutor, the lead character in this thriller series is Rachel Knight, and she is a prosecutor in the Special Trials Unit in Los Angeles, the District Attorney's Office, which is where I was for 10 years. And that's this small unit that handles the biggest, most high-profile cases in the office. And so her and her buddies, Detective Bailey Keller, who is the only woman in the robbery homicide division of LAPD, handle cases together. They're best friends, along with their buddy Tony LaCollette, another special trials prosecutor. And in these books, I wanted to show the realities of the world of being a prosecutor. In the DA's office, particularly in special trials, where uniquely they pick up the case early in the investigation and wind up going out in the field with the detective to interview witnesses, look at the crime scenes. They do a lot of that kind of work that prosecutors don't usually do because they don't have time. And so it's a unique kind of experience. I wanted to show the world as it really is, the camaraderie, the sense of a mission, of seeking justice. That's what it's all about. And so it's more than just a job. It is a mission in life, but also to show the warm, the buddy relationship between them, also the banter and the fun. There's a lot of, I know people don't believe me when I say it, but homicide detectives are some of the funniest people I ever knew. And, when you think about it for a second, it makes sense because the world is so grim. They have to laugh or else they can't do the job. And so the books have a fair amount of humor in them as well, lots of fun, and they live a life together. All the women in this have boyfriends, and so you have some of that as well, kind of a well-rounded thing. And in Killer Ambition, the most recent one, Rachel Knight takes on the prosecution of a Hollywood power player, and that puts her in the middle of a media spotlight. So I show what it's like to be in the middle of a high-profile trial with cameras in the courtroom and reporters chasing everyone down.
That's my next question for you. How does that kind of media attention affect cases like those of O.J. Simpson and George Zimmerman?
Each one in different ways, but I had never intended, to tell you the truth, to write about the experience of a case in the media spotlight, because I really thought, it can't really be a trend. It's really going to go away, and then, it really hasn't gone away. And in the past 5-6 years, I've seen that quite the contrary. It's become kind of a staple, at least of cable news, and now we see of news. So it's not going away because it is a relevant thing to write about, and so I decided it's time to write about what that's like because it seems to be a fact of our world. It does affect, the media spotlight certainly affects trials. You know, witnesses who are afraid of the spotlight and don't want that kind of scrutiny, don't want to come forward, minimize their testimony, sometimes even never get found because they don't want to be found. That's bad. Some witnesses who want for whatever reason, want the spotlight, love it, and are not really witnesses, what I call faux witnesses, make up stuff or exaggerate what little information they have so that they can get the spotlight. Judges, some judges really don't get affected by it at all. As we've seen in, I think Judge Nelson in the Zimmerman trial, as well as Judge Perry in the Casey Anthony trial, did a brilliant job of just being excellent jurists, not affected by the media, held everybody's feet to the fire and enforced the rules of evidence fairly across the board, did a beautiful job. On the other hand, not all judges can resist the allure of instant fame, and then things go crazy and the courtroom is out of control. So to that extent, that's a bad thing. Then lawyers pander to the camera, some do, some don't. But, the effect is not necessarily in the service of justice, even though I firmly believe in the public's right to know and to follow these cases and to know what's going on. I'm very much on the fence about whether cameras are necessary to make that happen.
All right. Again, the book is called Killer Ambition. Marcia Clark, congratulations on the new book, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.